Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play Terracota Army. To set the game up, set these rings to random starting position and make sure you align these segments along these lines. Then place one of these dry clay tokens on each of these 4 warehouses on the game board. Place these 2 inspectors on their starting position on these inspector tracks. Place these 16 specialist miniatures on their designated spaces on the game board. These priority tokens are placed in this space, and in a 4-player game use all of them. In a 3-player game you would only use these first 2 tokens, and in a 2-player game you would only use one of them. I'm going to demonstrate a 3-player game, so we will use both of these tokens, arrange them so that the number 1 token is on top, and place the tokens in this space. Then take these scoring tiles, draw 5 of them at random and place them in these spaces on the game board. And make sure that this small black triangle is always in the bottom left corner of the tile. You can return all the unused scoring tiles back to the box. Then place this round marker token on the first round. Place this warrior organizer with all the warrior miniatures next to the game board. And then each player chooses a color and takes all the components of that color, 15 player bases, 6 master tokens, 3 coins and 4 weapon tokens, 5 artisans and 5 craftsmen, and 1 scoring marker and 1 turn order marker. The number of artisans and craftsmen used in the game depends on the number of players in the game. Use all 5 of them in a 2-player game, only 4 of them in a 3-player game, and only 3 artisans and 3 craftsmen in a 4-player game. Again, since I'm demonstrating a 3-player game, each player would have 4 artisans and 4 craftsmen. However, take all those artisans and place them to the common supply next to the game board together with the artisans of other players. Players will be able to acquire these artisans during the game. Place all the scoring markers on the 0 space of the scoring track and take the turn order markers, randomly determine the starting player, and then place the markers of other players in a clockwise direction. Using this player order, the second player in that player order receives 1 wet clay token. If there is a 3rd player in the game, that player would receive 2 wet clay tokens and 1 coin. And if there was a 4th player, that player would receive 3 wet clay tokens and 2 coins. These starting resources would be placed in the player's supply. With that, the setup is complete. In Terracota Army, players represent talented craftsmen and artists building this famous Terracota Army in this mausoleum. The game is played over 5 rounds, and each round has 3 phases: the action phase when players take actions on this rondel, then scoring phase, and then the cleanup phase, which is a preparation for the next round. In the action phase, players take turns in the player order, and first they may optionally rotate the ring 1 segment, then they would take one of their workers, place it on the ring and then perform actions from all the 3 rings, starting with the inner ring, then continuing with the middle ring and then the outer ring. Then the worker is placed on the outside of the ring. With these actions you will primarily gain resources like clay and sometimes coins to build these statues of Terracota Army or these specialist statues. You will be able to use these masters located here and their special abilities. And you will also take these actions which allow you to activate your weapon tokens, and with those weapon tokens you can use the special abilities of the Terracota Army, or you can build these specialists. Once all players use all their workers and place them on the ring, the scoring phase will take place. You will first score these inspectors. Each of them will award victory points to the player who has the most statues in their corresponding column or corresponding row based on the position of these inspectors. Then you will do similar scoring with these musicians. If they are placed in a mausoleum, they will award victory points to the players with the statues in the corresponding column or corresponding row. And third, you will score victory points based on the conditions on the current scoring tile for the current round. That would be the end of one round. You would perform the cleanup phase and prepare everything for the next round. The game ends at the end of round 5, and after you perform the end of round scoring, you would also perform the end game scoring, where you would first score these footmen, then the groups of warriors in mausoleum, and then few additional victory points for these kneeling archers. I will explain this endgame scoring in more detail at the end of the video. However, to give you some basic idea how these statues are scored at the end of the game, first with this footman, the player with the most statues in all the adjacent spaces to the footman scores the victory points for the dominance. All other players score the victory points for the presence, which is obviously a lower amount of victory points. These footmen look like this, and their bases indicate that the statues in all adjacent spaces are scored. So not just orthogonally adjacent, but also diagonally adjacent. Then the groups of warriors will be scored. The group consists of at least 2 miniatures of the same type, which are this time orthogonally adjacent, and these miniatures may belong to any players. In these groups, each warrior would score number of victory points equal to the number of players who have warriors in the group. And then, if at least 2 players have warriors in the group, you would score victory points for dominance and the presence. If the group would consist only of the warriors of 1 player, you wouldn't score any points for dominance. And then finally, if you would have any of these kneeling archers pointing towards any miniatures, those miniatures would score additional 2 points at the end of the game. So, in a nutshell, players would try to build the statues of the same type next to each other so that they score more victory points at the end of the game. And the larger the group, the more victory points for each statue in that group. But don't forget about the interim scoring at the end of each round as well. Then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game is the winner. So, the first phase of each round is the action phase. In this action phase, players take turns in this player order. On your turn, you can first rotate the inner ring or the middle ring. Then you will place one of your workers in one of the empty segments and then perform the actions in that segment. So, let's take a look at these steps in more detail. First, as these icons indicate, you can spend 2 coins from your personal supply and paying them to the general supply, and you may rotate either the inner ring or the middle ring. The inner ring can only be rotated clockwise, which is indicated by these blue arrows. The middle ring can only be rotated counterclockwise. You may only do this rotation once, so you may only spend 2 coins and rotate either the inner ring or the middle ring. You may not rotate both, and you may only do it once. So, for example, you either rotate the inner ring 1 segment clockwise, or you may rotate the middle ring counterclockwise. Make sure that the segments are aligned after the rotation. This step is optional, so if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. Then in the second step, take one of your workers from your personal supply and place it in one of the empty segments on the game board. There are 12 segments on the ring. This is 1 segment, and when placing a worker, you have to apply the following rules. If the segment is empty, you may place any of your workers in that segment. If the segment already contains a craftsman, so that's this smaller miniature, either your own one or the craftsman of any other player, and you have already acquired an artisan, you may place that artisan into the same segment. Then you may perform the actions from those segments. However, if that segment already contains an artisan of any player, no other worker may be placed in that segment. And just to clarify, if the segment is occupied by a craftsman, you may not place another craftsman in the segment. If you want to use that segment, you can only use an artisan. Then, after you choose the segment, let's say this one, you can perform the actions starting with the inner ring, then the middle ring, and then the outer ring. These actions are optional. If you don't want to perform the action from the inner ring or the middle ring, instead of taking that action, you may take one wet clay or one coin instead. However, you can only do that on the inner and the middle ring. If you are on the outer ring and you don't want to perform that action, you would simply do nothing. And just to reiterate, you must always perform this action in this order, starting with the inner ring, then middle, then the outer ring. With that, your turn is over and it's the next player's turn. Now I'm going to explain all the actions on these rings. Whenever you take an action with the symbol of coins, take the indicated amount of coins. So here 2 coins, 3 or 4. Place these coins in your personal supply. The same applies with these wet clay symbols. These are 2 wet clay tokens. Here we have 4 wet clay tokens. So again, place them in your personal supply and make sure you place them with this wet side up. The other side illustrates the dry clay. In order to build the statues, you would need the wet clay, and if you would have any tokens with this dry side up, it could be any number of them, even all of them. When you take the action with this symbol, it's here or here, you may flip all your dry clay tokens to their wet side. Then, when you take an action with this symbol, you may build a warrior. Here you have to pay 2 wet clay tokens, here you would have to pay 4, here 3 wet clay tokens, 4 again, so there are 6 spaces only on this inner ring. So let's say we take this action and we have to pay 2 wet clay tokens to build a warrior statue. You have to take those 2 wet clay tokens and pay them from your personal supply to the general supply. However, one of those tokens has to be placed in a warehouse in the corresponding segment with the dry side up. Here we're taking the action from this segment, which is this quartile, so the dry clay token has to be placed in this warehouse. If you would build a warrior with this action, that token will be placed in this warehouse, and so on. The reminder to place one of those clay tokens on the warehouse is indicated here. And then you may build a warrior of any type. These 4 types of statues are called warriors, although this one is the officer, this is the guard, this is the crossbowman, and this is the soldier. After you choose the type, take the bottommost statue from the organizer, and when you take the statue, immediately score the victory points shown in that row. Here, you would score 8 victory points. Attach your base to the statue and then you may place the statue in the mausoleum. You may place the statue in any empty space in the mausoleum, considering the end of the round scoring or the positions of any specialists, potential plans of your opponents, and so on. So in a nutshell, you may place that statue anywhere you want in any empty space. Then, if you have the weapon token of the corresponding type with this active side up, you can spend that token, meaning you can turn it to the inactive side, and activate the special ability of the newly built warrior. This is not mandatory. If you don't have the active token, or if you do but don't want to spend it, you don't have to. Now let me quickly explain all these 4 special abilities. After you build the officer and you activate its special ability, you may score 1 victory point, and you may move one of these inspectors 1 step forward or even backwards on the track. This is actually the only way how to move the inspector backwards. If the inspector is in a row or column which is not suitable for you, you may move it backwards so that you can score victory points at the end of the round. Then after you build the guard and activate the special ability, you score 3 victory points, and you may take any other statue of yours and move it any number of spaces in a straight line. You may only move it through empty spaces. You may never move through other statues. Then after you build the crossbowman, if you activate the special ability, you may score 1 victory point for each empty space between this warrior and any other statue in the same column or in the same row. There must be another statue in that row or column, so you would not be able to score 4 victory points for these 4 spaces. And if you have multiple options, you can choose which one you want. It wouldn't make any sense to choose this statue because you would score 0 victory points, but here you would score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 victory points. And after you build a soldier, if you activate the special ability, you get 1 victory point and 2 coins. Then with these 6 action spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, you can activate the corresponding masters. Those masters are shown in this area of the game board. Each master has a special ability, which I'm going to describe in just a minute. But if you activate the master and you don't have the master token of your color next to that master, you first have to choose one of your master tokens and pay the coins indicated on that token. You don't have to choose the cheapest one, you can choose any of them, but let's say I will choose this one. You need to pay the coins to the command supply and then take that master token, place it in that master's area, and then you can activate the ability. When you take that action and you already have the master token in the master's area, you can simply activate that ability. So let me quickly explain all the abilities of the masters here. When you activate the first one, you may build warriors, but you have to pay coins instead of the clay, and you have to spend amount of coins equal to the current round number. So in this example, we would have the 4th round, the player would have to pay 4 coins. Now, when you build that warrior, you have to choose a warrior type with the most remaining statues. If there would be a tie, you can choose any of those. And after you build the warrior, you don't score any victory points and you may not activate the special ability. Then with the second one, you can simply activate the inner ring action 2nd time. So for example, if this would be my first action, build a warrior for 4 clay tokens, and I would move to this action space, I would be able to activate this action again, so build another warrior for another 4 clay tokens. Then this third master allows you to move one of the inspectors 1 or 2 spaces forward. So that means 1 or 2 spaces in the direction of these small red arrows. If the inspector would be in the last space and you would have to move it forward again, you would follow this line and move the inspector back to the first space. Then with this master, you would simply take 3 wet clay tokens. With this one, you would take dry clay tokens from 2 warehouses. You may take them from any 2 warehouses on the game board and you would place them in your personal supply. And finally, with the last master, you may reactivate all of your weapon tokens at once. So if not already active, you may reactivate all of them. Then if you would take this action with this symbol, take the topmost priority token from the game board. Each player may only have 1 priority token, and if the priority token shows a wet clay token, take the wet clay as well. And then moving out to the outer ring, if you take an action which shows one of these weapon tokens, you may reactivate that particular weapon token. And when you take an action with this symbol, you may build a specialist. In order to build a specialist, you have to have the corresponding weapon token active, and you also have to pay some coins. The basic cost is always 1 coin, so to build this kneeling archer, you would have to pay 1 coin. However, to build this musician, you would have to pay 2 coins, and you would have to pay 1, 2, 3 coins to build this footman. So, when building a specialist, choose the specialist type, you can only choose 1. Flip the corresponding active weapon token to the inactive side, then pay the cost, and take the corresponding specialist. You always take them from top to the bottom, and place that specialist in any empty space in the mausoleum. This kneeling archer is actually the only specialist, the only statue in the game where the facing of the statue matters. All other statues may be rotated any way you want. It has no effect on the scoring. Only with the kneeling archer it's important which direction he's facing. So similar to warriors, let me now quickly explain the special abilities of all these specialists. When you place this horse in the mausoleum, you have to place it in such a way that this space will be occupied by one of your warriors. So let's say we will use it with this one. So I would place it like this. Now, this warrior is now considered to be occupying all these three spaces, but it still counts as only one warrior for the scoring purposes, but it occupies all these three spaces. If, for example, another soldier would be placed in this space, it would still be part of the large group of soldiers, because it is effectively adjacent to this warrior. This musician awards 1 victory point to each statue, each warrior in the corresponding row or corresponding column during each scoring phase at the end of each round. These footmen award victory points at the end of the game to the player with the most statues in the surrounding spaces, and again, regardless of the type of those statues. And finally, these kneeling archers count as the warrior of the same type as the warrior they're facing, and thus creating a group. So if we would have it like this would already be a group of 2 warriors, although that kneeling archer doesn't belong to any player. Then for any scoring purposes, if there is a tie between players, the kneeling archer breaks the tie in the favor of the player whose statue that kneeling archer is facing. So in other words, if blue and yellow player would be tied, the yellow player would win that tie because of the kneeling archer. And finally, the kneeling archer would also award 2 victory points to that statue at the end of the game. And finally, when you take this action, you may upgrade your craftsman to an artisan. Take this craftsman who is taking the action currently and remove it from the game and replace it with your artisan from the common supply. So when all players completed all their turns, so they placed all their craftsmen and artisans, the action phase is over and we will move to the scoring phase. During the scoring phase, victory points will be scored from these inspectors, from these musicians, and from the scoring tile. First, we will score these inspectors. Both inspectors work in the same way. This one awards victory point for the majority in the corresponding row, this one in the corresponding column. The scoring is actually indicated next to these tracks. The player with the dominance scores 7 victory points. All other players with the presence score 3 victory points. To achieve the dominance, you must be the only player with the most number of statues, either in the column or the row. Looking at this column here, we have yellow player with 1 statue, because remember, this horse counts as the warrior of this type, spreading across all these 3 spaces. So 1 yellow warrior here, another yellow warrior, and the blue warrior. That means yellow player would score 7 victory points, blue player would score 3 victory points. If a purple player would have the statue here as well, that player would also score 3 victory points because the purple player would have the presence. If the purple player would also have a statue here, meaning purple player has 2 statues in that column and also the yellow player has 2 statues, then neither player has the dominance, and all players would simply score 3 victory points for the presence. When scoring this row, we have 1 warrior of the yellow player and 1 of the purple player. Again, remember, the horse always counts as only 1 warrior. However, in this example, we also have the kneeling archer here facing the purple statue. And that means that although these 2 players are tied for the most number of statues, purple player wins the tie because of this kneeling archer. So the purple player would score 7 victory points, yellow player only 3 victory points. Now, if we would have another yellow statue in this row, then yellow player would have the dominance because yellow player has 2 statues here and purple player only 1. Remember, the kneeling archer counts as another warrior of the same type as the warrior he's facing. However, that kneeling archer is a neutral statue. It doesn't count as the purple statue in this example. After scoring the inspectors, move both of them 1 space forward. Then these musicians award 1 victory point to each statue in the corresponding row or the corresponding column. So this one gives 1 victory point to this yellow statue and also to this purple statue. Remember, this statue counts as 1 warrior only, so there's just 1 victory point for yellow player, then the second and the third victory point for yellow, and also 1 victory point for this blue statue. This musician would give 1 victory point to the yellow player here and yellow player here, and also 1 victory point to yellow for this statue and this one. That means the same statue can score victory points from several musicians. And finally, you would score the scoring tiles. In this case, if we would have the third round and this scoring tile, we would score the bottom left-hand corner, the bottom left-hand quarter of the mausoleum. That's why these scoring tiles have to be oriented in such a way that this small black triangle is in the bottom left-hand corner. The player with the dominance in this quadrant would score 9 victory points, all other players with the presence would score 4 victory points. The quadrant area is only these 12 spaces, you can see it better here, these 12 slightly darker spaces. This middle column and the middle row, indicated by this red arrow, doesn't count as the quadrant. That middle row or the middle column can also be scored separately. For example, here we have the middle row scored in the 5th round. So looking at this bottom left quadrant, we have 1 yellow statue, this is another yellow statue, and we have 1 purple and 1 blue. So again, the yellow player would have the dominance, purple and blue would score victory points for the presence. Then the last phase of each round is the cleanup phase. First, determine the new player order. If there is any player with the priority 1 token, that player becomes the first player. Let's say it would be the purple player here. If no other player has the priority token, the relative position of those players wouldn't change. So here we would have purple player as the first player and then yellow and blue. When returning the priority tokens, stack them with the highest number at the bottom and the lowest number on the top. Then, if you have any wet clay tokens, flip them all to their dry side. However, these 3 masters allow you to keep one of those tokens on the wet side, if you have the master token in that area. So, in this example, the yellow player would be able to keep 1 token as the wet token. So that means that when you flip those tokens to the dry side, you can keep one of those tokens as a wet token. The purple player here would be allowed to keep 2 wet clay tokens on their wet side. Similarly, these masters give you 1 coin if you have the master token in that area. So here both blue and yellow player would gain 1 coin. Then all players retrieve all their workers, all the craftsmen and artisans, and place them back in their personal supply. Then rotate the inner ring 1 segment clockwise, and then the middle ring 1 segment counterclockwise. Advance the round marker to the next round and begin the new round following the new turn order. If this would be the end of the 5th round, the game would be over. Perform the endgame scoring now and start with this footman. To score the footman, players would count the number of their statues on all of these 8 surrounding spaces around each footman. The player with the dominance scores 8 victory points, the player with the presence scores 2 victory points. So with this footman, blue player has 2 statues, purple player has 1, so blue player would score 8 victory points, purple player would only score 2 victory points. With this footman, we have 3 yellow statues, 3 blue statues and only 1 purple. However, we have a kneeling archer facing a yellow statue, which means that yellow statue with the kneeling archer breaks the tie for the yellow player for this footman. So the yellow player would score 8 victory points, blue player and the purple would score 2 victory points. Now, in the second step, remove all the statues which are not part of a group. The group consists of at least 2 statues of the same type, regardless of the player color. So here we have one group of officers. Here we have a group of guards. This guard is not part of this group, because in order to be part of the group, the statue must be adjacent orthogonally. However, this guard has a facing kneeling archer, which counts as the warrior of the same type, so this is basically a group of 2 warriors, although this one is a neutral warrior. Here we have a large group of soldiers. Again, this soldier is not isolated, because this is one soldier which is stretched over 3 spaces. And here we have a group of crossbowmen, but here we have one isolated officer, so that one has to be removed from the game. Now, score each group separately. First, each warrior in the group is worth number of victory points equal to the number of players in that group. So with these officers we have only 2 players, yellow and purple, which means each warrior is worth 2 victory points. So yellow player would score 4 victory points, purple player would score 2 victory points. Looking at these soldiers, we have all 3 players here, which means each warrior scores 3 victory points. So that would be 6 for yellow, 6 for blue, and 3 for purple. Here we only have 1 player in that group, so this is just 1 victory point for this guard. However, these ones would all score 3 victory points each, because we have 3 players in this group. Then, if there are at least 2 players in the group, score the dominance and the presence. For the domination, you would score 5 victory points here. Presence scores 2 victory points. Don't forget that if you have the kneeling archer may break the ties. Here we have 2 yellow statues, 2 blue statues, so the kneeling archer breaks the tie in favor of the yellow player. And if the group only contains warriors of 1 player, don't score any victory points for the dominance or the presence. Finally, each kneeling archer would award 2 victory points to the player whose statue the kneeling archer is facing. So here yellow player would have 2 victory points and the purple player would have 2 victory points. Here the blue player would have 2 victory points. Count the total number of your clay tokens and coins, and it doesn't matter if the clay is wet or dry. And for each 2 tokens, score 1 victory point. So here this is 4 victory points, and then the player with the most points is the winner. So that's how you play Terracota Army. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can support the channel on the Patreon page or by clicking on the thank you button under the video. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.